Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 169 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Black and white photography. Who'd have thunk at black and white photography? Who would have thought that idea, that concept, would generate so much interest here in 2015, 2016 now? Yet it did. Dozens of emails, lots of people posting on Facebook and the Flickr camera position pages and taking a look at black and white photography and thinking about black and white photography and asking questions about black and white photography. And one of the things that a lot of people asked is, okay, so if I didn't have that experience of starting photography in black and white, like many people my age did back in the darkroom days. If I didn't have that experience, and here I am in 2016 in the digital era, how do I go about learning about black and white photography? How do I go about figuring out what makes a good black and white photograph, what a good black and white photograph is supposed to look like? And that was one of the first questions that came at me from a number of different listeners, including my great friend Lewis out there. Thanks, Lewis. And boy, the first answer I gave was going back to the old school and going back to Ansel Adams' book, The Print. I suppose I went back to that partly because Adams was an important photographer, obviously, and also because he was an important teacher about photography, not only in workshops like one that I attended way back in the 1980s, but also in books. So the Ansel Adams book, The Print, is about the process of making photographs in the black and white darkroom. And while there's a lot of information in the book about chemicals and paper and all of that stuff that isn't quite as relevant if you're scanning negative rather than using a darkroom, or if you're doing post-production on digital photographs and working with some sort of post-production software to convert those images to black and white, there's still good information in the book about contrast, about the sense of tones in the print, and about how black and white photography often tends to emphasize texture and line above other things. So I thought that one of the things that I could do here was to read a couple of sentences from Adams' book, and I'll put a link to the book on Amazon on the Camera Position blog and in the PDF that comes along with the app. But here is Adams talking about photography in general, but I think you'll see the black and white component here jumping out. And he said, just as different photographers can interpret one subject in numerous ways, depending on personal vision, so might they each make varying prints from identical negatives. And of course, Adams is writing this long before the digital era became prevalent, so we'll have to substitute digital file maybe for his word negative. He goes on to say, a great amount of creativity lies in the making of a print, with its endless subtle variations, which are yet all tied to the original concept represented by the negative. I've often said that the negative is similar to a musician's score and the print to a performance of that score. The negative comes to life only when performed as a print. Of course, that last little bit is a pretty famous piece of Adams' lore, one of those ideas that, the negative was something that was sacrosanct. It couldn't be changed once it was made, but the print could be performed in different ways. And I think that has a lot to do with how we might approach black and white photography. So he goes on to say, to repeat, visualization is the most important factor in making of a photograph. Visualization includes all steps from selecting the subject through to making the final print. I emphasize the importance of practice in visualization, the constant observation of the world around us, and the awareness of relationships in terms of shape and potential form, value interpretation, and emotional and human significances. I have previously stressed, Adams goes on to say, the great value of critically examining images other than your own, of all types, and trying to revisualize them in your own way. In addition to the considerations of point of view and negative exposure controls, we are now ready to consider the actual image values. Of course, we cannot be certain of the physical limitations of camera location or the quality of the light or even what our emotional reaction might be in the presence of the actual subject. But we can make valuable assumptions and enhance our picture viewing experience by attempting to revisualize the original subject. And again, I'd just like to go on with one more little section here from Adams. He said, there appear to be people who are value blind, just as there are people who are tone deaf. Practice and experience may overcome such deficiencies, at least to a degree, and the viewing of original fine prints is perhaps the best instruction. A fine print that has been generally assumed to have a full range of values, clear delineation of form and texture, and a satisfactory print color. But what a catastrophe it would be if all photographs only met these criteria. True, a note of pure white or solid black can serve as a key to other values, and an image that needs these key values will feel weak without them, but there's no reason why they must be included in all images, any more than a composition for the piano must include the full range of the 88 notes of the keyboard. Marvelous effects are possible within a close and subtle range of values. And of course, Adams there using music as a metaphor, as he often did, certainly because his skill as a piano player, as a musician, was evident. It was something that he was pursuing as a career, but eventually gave it up in favor of pursuing photography as a career. But certainly he sensed the similarities between the use of tone and the use of expressive device in music as in photography. You may have heard there that in what Adams was writing, he notes a couple of important things. One is taking a look at photographs by other photographers. And one of the fortunate aspects of our world today is that we have access to the work of countless photographers at our fingertips with the internet, and certainly all of the photo sharing sites that we use of 500px or 500px. How do you pronounce that anyway? Somebody let me know. Is it 500px? Is it 500px? And Flickr and so forth and so on give us the opportunity to take a look at photographs in large numbers. My preference is to seek out photographers whose work I know well or I'm interested in learning about and taking a look at them. A couple that I pulled out in response to a couple of the people who emailed me about photography were the Japanese photographer Hiroshi Sugimoto and his Seascape photographs. And I suggested when looking at those, and I'll link to these in the Camera Position blog again, but you can find him as well online, that his sense of tone is extremely subtle and very, very low in contrast. The page that I'll link to has 3 seascapes that are, just ever so kind of darkly gray and really interesting in their dark grayness. So they have a particular interest to them. And another one that I have suggested here is Michael Kenna as a great contrast here. Contrast, I guess, being one of the operative words, because you can just even look at a grid of his images, like I'll link to, and you can see the way in which he uses tone and the fact that in his photographs there tend to be large areas of very light tone and large areas of very dark tone, and a number of grays in between, but perhaps fewer than there would be in Sugimoto's work. As you begin to sort through photographers who might have varying approaches to photography, I'll also link to Ralph Gibson and his extremely high contrast approach to photography. And if you begin to look at these, you can begin to see how photographers approach the idea of tone. Another thing that I think Adams has to say to us in his book, and that I would recommend as well, is taking a look at actual photographs in a museum or a gallery. And of course, I know that my listeners listen from all over the world, so I don't know any of the museums in your area, but many of the better museums have photographic departments where study rooms are available, and you can sit down with a box of prints from the masters. And doing that is a wonderful way to see how photographers use tones to define things in black and white. So here in the Chicago area where I live, the Museum of Contemporary Photography has a photo study room, as does the Art Institute of Chicago. And of course, there are a number of great galleries in our city where you can go and take a look at photographs. And so many of you who live in or near big cities may be able to avail yourself of those kinds of resources or galleries of photography where you can begin to look at how photographers who have achieved some sense of notoriety have approached the idea of black and white. Another thing that I'm going to just mention here is that there are a number of people out there who have emailed me to say, you can't really ignore color when it comes to making black and white photographs. And it certainly is true. I think one of the things that those of us who practiced black and white film photography back when it was more or less our only sort of manipulable option, the only thing that we could adjust post-exposure and change development of film and burn and dodge or lighten and darken in the darkroom, was that we did have to pay attention to the fact that a red flower and a green leaf might appear the same tone in a black and white photograph. So the idea that we can't really completely ignore color is important as well, especially because our new post-exposure controls of Lightroom and Photoshop and a number of the other tools that are out there allow us to rather dramatically alter the appearance of what the color was in the original scene relative to what the tone appears to be in our manipulated black and white image. And in fact is, for me, one of the coolest parts about digital photography and black and white is this ability to alter whether red is light or dark, or the things that we used to do with filters over the lens of the camera to alter how our panchromatic black and white film showed us color. So always looking at color as a part of the process is a pretty interesting notion of this. So I'm going to give you this further assignment of looking at the world in black and white, but also beginning to look at important photographers you think might have an interesting sense of how they use black and white. Certainly in the black and white work that I've done, really the majority of the fine art work that I've done over my lifetime has been in black and white, and I tend to look for contrasts of value where I can juxtapose a light value against a dark value. But I've seen on Flickr in the camera position group some really, really wonderful images that juxtapose light tone against light tone. So begin to look at black and white photography out there in the world. I'll link to Hiroshi Sugimoto and Michael Kenna, and I'll link also to Lenswork Magazine, tremendous resource, both because of the kinds of photographers that they publish, although they're also doing color now. Way to go, Brooks, getting color into the magazine now. But the quality of reproductions in Lenswork is so good that they often have as high quality an appearance as you might find in an original print. So tremendous resource there. So take a look at those things and take a look at what you can learn from looking at black and white photography and sensing what it is that photographers have done with tone and the variety of tones and how they're using the palette of grayscale to express themselves in photography. So thanks for joining me, and thanks to those of you who have gone to iTunes and dropped a recommendation, a review of Camera Position there. I really appreciate that. It helps more people find the podcast, and the more people we have in our little community here, the more folks we can bounce ideas off of and share images with and so forth and so on. So I really appreciate that. And also just a quick note, 1 or 2 spaces still are available in my Italy photography workshops for June of 2016. And one last note is that coming up shortly here, Camera Position turns 10. Camera Position will have been in the podcast sphere, is that a word? I don't know, in the podcast universe for a decade. I really appreciate all of you who've been out there, some of you listening from way back at the beginning, but I probably will link out in various places to some of the earlier podcast episodes that have been extremely popular. For those of you who've been listening a long time, they'll be old friends, and for those of you who have just joined Camera Position, you may find some nuggets of help and understanding of photography back there in some of those early episodes. You'll also hear my voice 10 years younger, which is kind of a fun thing for me to go back and listen to as well. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.